Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Elena Brandt with us today. She's a PhD. She's founder of Besample. It's research beyond the West, which is quite an interesting and relevant topic right now. Mom of four in Florida. Glad to have you on, Elena. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you're up to?
Yeah, hi everyone. Honored and excited to be here. It's actually my first podcast in my life, so very exciting. Yeah, I'm working head down on building Besample, which is a research platform for behavioral scientists that helps them collect data from people who live, as we call it, beyond the West. So there's a big problem in behavioral science that almost everything we know about people is based on data from mostly Americans, so we don't really have that much exposure to the humanity, and we're trying to build to bridge the gap.
So, why is this a big problem? And how why do only we do research on Americans? Well, I mean, it makes sense because these are the people that are going to consume the end product, right? But what kind of data are we missing out? Data from immigrants, I would guess.
uh, when it comes to fundamental behavioral science, we want to understand how humans function, basically the nature of people. And my favorite example that I often use in like talks or pitches is about math ability across biological sexes. So for decades, scientists in America assumed that women have a worse natural ability for mathematics compared to men. And this was based on a lot of data and a lot of research where boys consistently outperformed girls on any kinds of math problems. But then so it lasted for like 5 decades. And then at the beginning of the 21st century, scientists finally went like beyond the West systemically and started seeing what's going on in other countries. And what they found out was that there was likely no biological difference. So there are cultures in which girls outperform boys. There are cultures where they're even. So it looks like it mostly, or maybe even only, depends on upbringing, educational practices. And I think this is just an example of how important it is to look at a broader range of conditions when we're making any conclusions about human nature. If we want to tap nature of people, studying just Americans is not enough, apparently.
Right. Intriguing. And how do you actually monetize that? Is it a big enough problem so that businesses want to pay you actually for this?
So there's a difference in how businesses versus kind of academia uses. For businesses, the question is often different. It's, for example, a company is going to a new market somewhere in like an emerging economy, let's say in Africa or like South Asia or Latin America, and they would be interested in, is there enough demand for this product, or does the problem exist, or like are people able to pay for this product, something like that, right? And we do help with those kinds of research questions too. But right now, our main avenue is helping scientists answer like more fundamental questions about human nature. Uh, the way it's monetized, we basically charge for data collection and also for reusing secondary data that we have previously collected on our participants. And the research questions that we get span from how is adult anxiety, like clinical anxiety, predicted by childhood attachment, to how do public transit patterns change under war, right? So there's like a wide variety of different questions that researchers target.
Right. And when you say, you charge on data, what service do you provide to them? You actually go fetch the data in the Eastern world from these, I guess, obscure website like Archive or whatever it's called, but the Asian version or whatever. You go scrape that and you return it. Is it like a full SaaS model, self serve, or is there like a lot of human service component behind that?
It's a DIY product platform, so it's basically software, but it's sort of like right now the main use case is generating primary data. So rather than scraping, we have two, right? So we have a component where we already have the data stored in our database. So here it works more like a SaaS. Researchers just want to access it, right? Now, the more popular use case as of now is actually generating this primary data live in this moment, because for this rest of the world, for like the 95% of the world that lives out there, we don't really have this data to be scraped in the first place, right? So most of the times researchers have to make those take those primary measures from people, measure their online behavior, ask them questions, have them participate in an experiment. Most of the times so far it is happening in real time. So let's say the easiest example would be a person somewhere over in Ghana, let's say, gets a link to a behavioral experiment that they have to go to and participate. And then the measures are like the data is being captured in this moment.
Interesting. And the business model, is it pay per research? Is it pay per usage, or is it like just a monthly flat fee per university?
We actually are a marketplace, more so than a SaaS in terms of the business model. So right now we're early, right? So we're still kind of figuring out the best fit for the product. But right now, the way we're generating revenue is we are charging per data point. So basically, researchers pay a fee for every like data capture from a person, usually representing a particular country.
Got it. And
Mhm.
you've just been funded, I believe, like Techstars, maybe a couple VCs.
Mhm.
When did you started that one, and how's the revenue going? Do you see this scaling?
We Yes, we were part of Techstars Columbus, and then I'm actually wearing it to like advertise a little bit. And then that was in 2024, and after that we raised a pre-seed round. After that, we've been actually, because pre-seed, we're mostly working on the product, kind of improving it to better meet the use case of our customer. We have been seeing growth since then too. I cannot yet call it scaling. I don't even know if we're at the stage where scaling makes sense. We're still kind of like figuring out some of the things. But yeah, so we've grown about 2.5 times since then.
And maybe we should have started with that when I asked it the question why. I believe you're from Russia, right? Like, is
That's
that
right.
your
Yes, originally I'm from Russia.
that must be your why? It's like you've grown up in a different part of the world in which like the Western narrative is not the main narrative, right? That me, I've never grown up in. I mean, I spent some time in Hong Kong, right? But I've
Mhm.
never experienced like, yes, the narrative was different, but I've never seen it that way. Is that like where you first understood that, like, yeah, the West must be missing out on just thinking their version's always the best?
Oh yeah, very much so. So when I came over to the US, which was 7 years ago, I wanted to pursue my dream of studying social psychology. I was just always fascinated by this discipline. And back in Russia, I worked in tech and science, doing communications and PR. And so here I started over, and I went to grad school to get my PhD in social psychology, just because I was so excited about it. And one of the things that I noticed immediately was how much of the hypothesis and the ways researchers asked questions was informed by the Western, not only agenda, but more like the Western assumptions, as in like some researchers, they haven't even been beyond the US, right? So they can hardly imagine a life where you don't have health insurance or a car, or you don't have enough money to like buy food, and you're constantly physically hungry. And this informs a lot of human behavior and human psychology and economic decisions. And, so oftentimes we see that the Western default in behavioral science is that people are sort of like us here, right? They don't have big problems in with like buying food, or they are actually covered on most fronts. This is not the way the world operates. And coming from Russia, I knew that. So I got interested in the problem, and then I just learned why this is so. And one of the reasons is that behavioral science had been based for decades, for actually like over 100 years, on data coming from the West, right? Why that is so? Because it's notoriously hard to get data from elsewhere. This is the problem that we're solving for. This is what we're building for. Let's say you want to collect data from people living in India or Ghana or Brazil. How do you pay them? How do you pay people who live there for participating in research? And you may say, well, maybe PayPal. And my answer is no. You won't believe how few places in the world there are where PayPal actually works for the case of paying a physical person. Almost everywhere, we have to find a local payment system to just be able to transfer cash to a person who participates in surveys, right? We also need to vet them. We need to stay kind of like local in how we vet them for being humans, not AI. This is a big problem right now, right? How do we know? Because it's online research and it's oftentimes asynchronous. How do we know it's a real person going through your web pages, that it's not an AI bot? And yeah, stuff like that. So there's just an infrastructure layer that has not been built for research beyond the West, and we're building it.
That's intriguing. And yeah, a bunch of people don't even have bank accounts, right? Here in Mexico, for example.
That's right.
Why did you move from Russia to the US, and what cultural differences do you see? And are there a bunch of smart, ambitious people like you in Russia that are doing the same move and just leaving and not staying? And also, can you address the fact that, yeah, Russia is not pure evil, right? Like the Russian people are not necessarily their
People
leaders.
are not, no. Yeah, so it's funny that you ask, because I even have a article on Business Insider about 5 biggest culture shocks moving from Russia to Florida, and not only Florida, just the U.S. in general. Yeah, I'm happy to share it. I guess one of the biggest differences I spotted was how, and this is probably the reason I started a business. I actually never thought of myself as an entrepreneur when I was living back in Russia. It's just kind of not in the air, if that makes sense. When you come to America, it's like everywhere. It's the way you think of yourself as a successful person, or like as a complete person. It's not necessarily immediately how much money you have, or it is about the impact that you're making with what you're doing, right? And it's this culture of ownership. It's a culture of I want to start my own thing and have my own thing. And so I think there's a big impact of America on the fact that I addressed this problem by starting a business. It's also just the stats. So America has, I don't remember exactly the number, but a few times X the number of entrepreneurs per 1,000 people than Russia has, right? And it's also just I guess it's just in the way this country was established, right? So the private property that is actually being defended, right? And the fact that it's not overly regulated, so it's not hard to start a company. I even see that in small little daily things. Like when you come to a coffee shop here and you ask for a muffin and they don't have a muffin, the barista will say, I don't have a muffin. If you do that over in Russia, you would hear, there is no muffin here. Like this person at the bar does not think of this place as their own. And here we think of what we do as
Yeah,
our
the
own.
I is very strong for sure.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, and of course, also another way this affected me is just how strong the culture of science is here. Uh, there are hundreds of top-notch universities that are right now our customers, right? And just the standards for science, just the amount of funding that it gets from the government is amazing. So it's probably the best market to build such a tool in. I don't even know if there's other country in the world where it would be so relevant.
Right. What have been some of your insights, behavior wise and psychological wise, that you had, that as someone that studies people and culture? I mean, the entrepreneurial one is strong in individualism. We also get some of that in Mexico. Yeah, in
Mhm.
Russia, it's interesting, right? Is that entrepreneurs sometimes they'll get their stuff taken away from them by the state, right? And just like a little bit in Mexico, if you want to make a lot of money, and in Russia, you go in politics, right? Sadly, it's really sad. That's like the
Mhm.
how you kill a country, in my opinion. But what other insights have you got as of late about humanity and or founders in general? I'm curious.
Hmm. We are. I'm glad you asked, because we're getting those insights almost like every week, and I often post about them on my Medium blog. So it's amazing how different life is beyond the West. We recently looked at the average number of siblings that people have in the West versus beyond the West, and it's like a few times more, right? So the average would be 5 or 6 versus one here, right? We sometimes bump into unexpected cultural quirks. For example, we recently noticed that when we one of the countries that we offer to researchers through us is Turkey, and we noticed that when we looked at the distribution of age, we saw a very weird bimodal distribution where a lot of people were aged around 30 or around 1900. And then turned out that the word age in Turkish is very similar, like the same to the word year. And so some people, instead of inputting their age, were inputting the year of birth, which like skewed the data. So we had to like clean for it. Or for example, even basic things about are you a man or a woman or are you non-binary? Well, first of all, we in the West think like that, like everyone in the world shares the same paradigm of being binary versus non-binary. And in a lot of places, it just doesn't work this way. People have their own cultural categories for that. One thing that we noticed in Indonesia, for example, people were not selecting male or female, and they were not selecting non-binary when asked about their gender, but they were inputting a word that sounded weird to us at first. It was something like lucky lucky. And then when we talked to the locals, we found out that males in Indonesia think about themselves as young or older males. So they were not selecting male because the word for it was more like an older male, like a more adult male, and they were young men. It wasn't non-binary. It was just that there's a whole cultural component to how you think of yourself in terms of gender. Age also matters when you think about gender. Or finally, another very interesting thing that we bumped into recently, we recently added Japan to the platform, and a lot of researchers are interested in Japan because it's such a remote, such a different culture. And we're actually seeing that. Sometimes there's a study run on Besample where Japanese respondents would just drop out mid-study for no apparent reason. And when we talk to them, we find out something like Japanese culture is indirect, right? And sometimes they think that the way the Western study is structured is not appropriate. Like it is just being too direct, or it is asking too much about themselves individually, which is something that they're not very comfortable with sharing, right? And we're just seeing that in the participation stats, which is kind of fascinating, right? And we're the first maybe platform to like deal with this, culturally. So yeah, a lot of those quirky insights almost every week from different corners of the world.
Right, right. Shouldn't we talk about the north and south instead of east and west? Like, is that something you've considered?
Actually, I think you're right. I think in a lot of contexts, the audience that we work with, this unique, what I call beyond the West, we also call it the global South. I think you're right. And I think there's neither of the divisions is actually fully complete. Let's say Australia, where is it? It's kind of like in the South, and it's also kind of like in the East, but culturally it is very Western and like kind of Northern, right? So neither of the division is perfect, but yes, we can. It's just that I guess in the behavioral sciences, there's a tradition of thinking about the West as being dominant in behavioral science. There's even a term, weird, Western educated, industrialized, rich democratic populations that most research to date has been kind of based on. And then the rest is like non-weird, right? Beyond the West. But we can also say that, yes, it is different from the global North, thus being in the global South. I think both are kind of legit terms.
What do you see in difference between West and East, between AI usage and also how
Mhm.
the government shape AI policy?
This is a fascinating question, and honestly, we don't know kind of enough about it yet because it's all unfolding in real time. What I will mention is that uh, we are supporting quite a few research projects now looking at exactly that. So, how do people? We have like a project explicitly measuring trust in AI across countries in the world. We're also supporting a project from a like collaboration of universities where they're looking at whether people turn to AI for mental health support and whether that is different between different countries. So the honest answer is we don't know yet. The data is actively being collected on it in real time. So I'll keep you posted about that.
And who has the healthiest mental health between East and West, generally speaking?
Who has sorry, what in mental health?
The healthiest mental health.
Oh, the highest kind of mental health.
Yeah.
There's this World Happiness Report that every year looks at where people feel the best in terms of their subjective well-being, and it's oftentimes counterintuitive. So we see Scandinavian countries sometimes being in the top of the list. I know Israel is very high on the top of the list, and I also know, sadly, that the U.S. really lags behind, especially for our level of GDP per capita. So for the country as wealthy as ours, it's actually shameful how low we are in this global happiness ranking. I don't think that there is a really a East versus West, kind of like a robust indicator. Okay, like the West versus the East, and here's which one is doing better. Of course, people in wealthier countries tend to have like better mental health just because of the resources and the infrastructure to support it. So in that respect, I guess it would be fair to say that the West is probably doing a little better. But then it's really, it's really, there's really a lot of variability between the East and West. I would say for me, it's always surprising how well Israel is doing. It's sort of like culturally in between East and West, right? It's also exposed to so much stress, and what's happening
I
there.
call bullshit on that. I call
Yeah.
major bullshit on that. I think it's propaganda basically to have people come in Israel, because I speak to a lot of Israel entrepreneurs. By the way, they're some of my favorite people because they're so resilient and gritty, but they're stressed the fuck out, especially when the bombs go off. They're not happy about it, so that's fucking bullshit. I'll call it out. What would you say?
And actually, you know what? We'll have to see what the newest World Happiness Report will show. Maybe I'm basing on the one that was
Well,
maybe
it
like.
says 2025. It's total bullshit.
Hmm.
And
uh,
Mexico, I live there. I won't call bullshit on Mexico, which is tent. Mexican
mhm,
people are quite happy with not a lot, right?
mhm,
And also, I want to hear your take on that one, because
yeah.
Mexico is an interesting country. I'm not sure if you've studied it, but I'm in Oaxaca. Oaxaca is one of the poorest state in Mexico, but I will say it's probably one of the happiest. It's one of these places where people don't have a lot to compare with. Like there's not a lot of luxury cars here,
Mhm,
for example. So it's not like they get this inequality feeling. There's not a lot of crimes. There's no
mhm.
strong narco presence here, for example. So there is poorness, but there's not unhappiness related to being poor.
I think you're
VS,
exactly right.
yeah,
Mhm,
VS, like the state of Mexico, for example, where you have extreme inequality, you have
mhm,
billionaires in their Maybach next to the tamale seller.
mhm. And actually, I think one of the strongest, like across all of those reports, World Happiness reports, I think the strongest predictor, one of the strongest predictors, was how people are integrated in the community. So maybe this is what you were describing, right? So being close to other people who matter is consistently like a more probably a more consistent predictor of happiness than like having money. So I think you're very right here. But let me challenge you back. So when you're saying that because of what is happening in Israel, like people are not happy, I don't know about that necessarily. But what we have seen was a fascinating project in Ukraine, which is under, well, arguably even harder conditions, being bombed by a neighboring country. Unfortunately, I have some kind of historic relationship to this country. So there was a longitudinal project that looked at people's resilience under air raids and their spirit. And what they surprisingly found was that every day there was an air raid, it did not really drop people's morale. So they were feeling kind of not worse in terms of their, kind of brotherhood and the country's capability to stand in the face of this challenge. So I think the effects are not that linear and not that direct. So sometimes people have the resilience that may power their subjective well-being despite all the crap that is going on around them.
Hmm. Well, they're 111th, right? Which makes sense. So
Hmm.
they're not ranking high.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think no, I'll still stand behind my thesis. And I mean, it's more than just me being connected with these founders and talking to them frequently. It's also, you just look at the online posts. Israel, first, they've been there was a shock when the 7th of October happened, but the real shock came after that, when a bunch of random communities would support the terrorist attacks, right? Like that's terrible. That's like supporting
Hmm.
the Holocaust. And that created a lot of tension. And you just have to look at the tweets, right, and the posts. It has calmed down since then, but it's not happiness that you're seeing there. It's tension, it's anger, it's stress. So I would probably redo the World Happiness Index with like cortisol in blood, which is hard to measure.
Mm,
Maybe connect with like the Whoop data, their sleep scores, right, and all of that. And
Oh,
Like
you are touching on a fascinating topic. Yeah, you're like,
yeah,
how much is this? Look, World Happiness Report is built on self-reports. Like people are saying, and if I'm
correct.
remembering correctly, their
Right.
item is basically like the way they're measuring it. Like I'm asking you, Charles, like out of the like between the worst possible life, which would be a number one on a scale, to like the best possible life on Earth, that would be number 10. Where are you, right? So like when people are answering this question, it's great that it's so broad in a way, right? Because like they're factoring in everything that's going on in their lives. But then also, uh, is it capturing their level of cortisol? You're right. Like it's probably not, right? Or very, very loosely. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying. I think that kind of remeasuring this with more objective indicators such as how people are feeling physically is one of the next steps that could be done in this well-being science. It would be extremely more expensive to run something like that, right? So there
Or
are
just
costs.
partnership with Whoop.
Hmm?
Whoop's API data, just a partnership with
Mhm,
Whoop would be fun. That's why I'm bullish on Whoop, even though like as a
mhm,
business they have their flaws, right? But yeah, that'd
mhm,
be helpful. Their biological age also is usually a good sign of if you take care of yourself and if you're not stressing too much. It's just that
mhm,
Israel as a country, they're gritty by nature, right? Like since they
mhm,
were young, they were taught to rephrase adversity as a positive thing. By the way, that's why I like them again. And I
mhm,
myself am also very gritty. I do ultras, and if you ask me like, is this hard? I'll tell you no. But
mhm,
in reality, it's really fucking hard, right? It's just that my brain is always rephrasing these things on a whim of like, oh, this is just like another day fighting. But yeah, that's fascinating. It's really nice to talk about that with you. Where can people find out more about you, Elena?
I'm sorry, say it again. Where?
Where can people find out more about your
Oh,
business?
my LinkedIn is probably the most active account, and we also have a blog since recently that I write to. We have apparently a website that is the platform that researchers are using. But then, if it's for general audience, I want to say that we're seeing more and more of it. That data powered by Besample is being featured in peer-reviewed publications on various topics. Our coolest so far is a Nature article. You know Nature, right? Like one of the probably most reputable journals, and it actually took a look at global loneliness, which I think is an also very interesting topic. So here in the US, we kind of think of loneliness as being bad, right? Like loneliness is something that is, it kind of sucks. But then they took a different approach. They were like, okay, but let's look at what different cultures think about loneliness. What if they rather think of it as solitude that is good for your mental health? It's like a restoration time when you don't have to spend the energy on those interactions with others. And what they find, surprisingly, is that people's subjective experience of being alone, back to happiness, right? Does loneliness make them happy versus sad? Is actually hinging upon whether they think about loneliness as something good or something bad, which is a cultural thing. So this is fascinating. This is why it got into Nature. So one of the kind of ways to get exposed to Besample is through those articles that scientists publish on our data.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna research more on that. So that was Elena Brandt and Charles Cormier for another